Welcome to The Scientist, a Hollywood edition. On this podcast, we explore the minds and methods of history's most famous and impactful scientists. These could be people that are technologists as well as actresses, as today's guest, well, not really a guest, but as today's subject is. I'm your host, Brian Keating, the Chancellor's Distinguished Professor of Physics at UC San Diego, host of the Into the Impossible podcast. And we're going into an impossibly fascinating story, a Hollywood story, a story fit for Hollywood. One of the most extraordinary stories that I've told in the history of invention. A little bit of a departure from the straight physics and astronomy that we've been doing to date. But it's a story I want you to know because in a sense, it's sort of paradigmatic of this sort of blend between the Founders podcast by David Senra and this unique exploration of scientific biographies and history that I love to do on this sub-podcast. It's part of the Into the Impossible brand network. We're going back again to history. 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic is raging. German U-boats are torpedoing and decimating Allied shipping, sending thousands to watery graves. Children are being evacuated, and they're being torpedoed on their ships without warning. And in a Beverly Hills mansion, between takes of her latest blockbuster MGM picture, the woman the studio calls the most beautiful in the world is hunched over, not a script, but a drafting table, designing weapon systems that could change the course of the war forever. Her name was Hedy Lamarr. And if you think you know her story, you don't really know the half of it. So Act 1, we'll do this Hollywood style, the making of a mind. Here's what most people never understood about Hedy Lamarr. The beauty was real. It was obvious. But that was the least interesting thing about her. She had an unusual name, born Hedwig Keisler in Vienna in 1914. She grew up in a world where being brilliant was expected, not exceptional. Her father, Emil, was not just a banker. He was an engineer at heart, trapped in a financier's body. And every walk her father would take with her became a tour of the masterclass of mechanical engineering, of principles of mathematics and the physical sciences. From printing presses to streetcars, Hedy remembered. He explained how everything worked. Not what it did, but how it worked. The distinction matters. This wasn't a casual curiosity on her part. This was cultivated. This was systematic deconstruction of reality. While other children were learning to see the world and count their 1, 2, 3s as consumers, Hedy was learning to see it as an engineer. Every machine had a problem it solved. Every problem had multiple solutions, multiple ways it could be improved upon. Now, think about this. At age 6, while other kids were playing with their dolls, Hedy was taking them apart to understand their inner mechanisms. She had a little stage under her father's desk where she'd act out entire stories, a prelude of what would come. But she was also memorizing the desk's construction, understanding why and how the drawers slid smoothly out, figuring out how the lamp's adjustable arm worked. The pattern was set early for her. Surface performance, hiding systematic analysis. People would see the performance, but they'd miss out on the analysis going on beneath the surface entirely. This would define her entire life. At 16, she made a decision that reveals everything about how she thought and how she would think for the rest of her life. Instead of finishing school like a proper Viennese girl, she altered a hall pass, added a 0, turning 1 hour into 10, and snuck into Austria's largest film studio. Not to be discovered, not to be noticed as an ingenue, but to work. She wanted to be a script girl because script girls were on the sets all the time, watching the actors work. She wasn't seeking fame. She was seeking access to information. She wanted to understand how the movie industry really worked. Mechanically, systematically, as an industry. And the director would give her a small part, $5 a day. Her parents were bewildered, but they weren't surprised. As her father once told her, "You have been an actress ever since you were a little baby." What he didn't realize was that the acting had always been camouflage for the studying of the craft. Act 2, the University of Suffering. Then came Fritz Mandl. If you want to understand how genius operates under extreme constraint, study what happened to Hedy between 1933 and 1937. Mandel was everything her father wasn't. Brutal, possessive, paranoid. The third richest man in all of Austria, an arms dealer, selling weapons to anyone who'd pay. Italy, even Nazi Germany, both sides of the Spanish Civil War. He did it all. He sold it all. If you had the money, he had the arms. He owned a munitions factory, hunting lodge, and a private army. He seemed to collect Hedy, just like he collected artillery pieces. She said, "I was like a doll in a beautiful jeweled case. I was watched and guarded and followed day and night." But here's where the story gets interesting. Well, Mandel thought he was imprisoning his little beautiful trophy. He was actually giving her access to the most advanced weapons research in all of Europe. Picture the dinner parties. Austrian generals, German admirals, Italian fascists, all discussing their latest technological developments, unknowingly that their casual arrogance led them to talk about it in front of one of the most brilliant women in all of Europe. Talking guidance systems, proximity fuses, radio-controlled bombs, wakeless torpedoes, and Hedy was there looking gorgeous, looking like eye candy, saying nothing. But those waters ran deep because she remembered anything. She remembered everything. Any girl can be glamorous, she'd later say with an acid precision. All you have to do is stand still and look stupid. So she stood still. She looked stupid, but she wasn't. She absorbed 4 years of graduate-level weapons engineering from the world's leading arms manufacturers and military innovators, so that in December 1936, when she met Helmuth Walter, the German engineer developing hydrogen peroxide torpedoes, he was very interesting, she said. He was talking about his remote-controlled, wakeless torpedo. She listened to him, and she heard how he explained the technical challenges, those of fuel capacity, of guidance systems, of wake avoidance, of detection avoidance. What Mandel and his guests never understood was that Hedy wasn't just listening. She was solving, categorizing, collecting every problem they mentioned. She was already thinking about how to solve them. But she couldn't act on any of it yet. The breakthrough came when her beloved father died suddenly of a heart attack. Now, from the moment of his death, she said, I was completely changed. I knew that I must run away, must escape, must make my plans to go to Hollywood. Death showed her how brief life was. She tolerated a bad marriage while her father was alive, but no longer. Now she understood. The only prison that matters is the one you build yourself. Act 3, The Great Escape. The escape was pure Hedy Lamarr. Methodical, brilliant, and completely misunderstood by history. She didn't drug a maid and steal her clothes, despite what MGM's publicity department would later claim. That was Hollywood fiction. The reality was even more impressive. She planned a strategic exit that turned her captivity into capital. First, she gathered intelligence. Those dinner time conversations, they weren't just background noise, they were her insurance policy. For example, she knew from her clandestine listening operations, she knew German torpedo designs, Italian radio guidance systems, Austrian ammunition specifications, all information that could buy her freedom or, if necessary, ensure her survival. Second, she negotiated with her husband's closest ally, Prince Starnberg, to get a role in a Viennese production. When her husband Mandel forbade it, she created the perfect pretext for their final confrontation. Third, she executed flawlessly. One night, after what would prove to be their last argument, while Mandel was away at a hunting lodge, she packed her jewels, furs, and critical documents. 2 large trunks, 2 small ones, 3 suitcases. Not the desperate flight of a panicked woman, the planned departure of someone who'd been preparing for months. The timing was perfect. War was coming to Austria. Jewish intellectuals were fleeing. Anti-Nazi actors and directors were streaming to Hollywood. She wasn't running from a marriage. She was escaping a continent about to explode. And then came the stroke of genius that would define her American career. She bought passage on the same ship as Louis B. Mayer, head of MGM Studios. Mayer initially offered her a terrible contract, $125 a week, pay your own way to America. So she walked out. But during the Atlantic crossing, she systematically charmed and influenced him and his wife while the parade of eligible men went past her, demonstrating her real star power in real time. By the time they landed in New York, she had a $500 a week contract, and that came with a 7-year gig. She also acquired a new name, Hedy Lamarr, borrowed from a dead actress as if to signal that her European identity was also dead. October 1937, Hedy Lamarr arrives in Hollywood with a suitcase full of Austrian military secrets, a head full of engineering knowledge, and a 7-year contract with the most powerful studio in the world. The stage was set for the most unlikely invention story in history. Act 4, The Frequency of War. September 17, 1940, the SS city of Bernards, carrying 90 British children to safety in Canada, is torpedoed by a German U-boat. Only 13 children survive. 77 drowned in the icy North Atlantic. Hedy Lamarr reads the news in her Beverly Hills home, holding her own adopted baby son. And something crystallizes in her mind. The Allies need better weapons, remote-controlled weapons, weapons that can't be jammed. And this is where most people lose the thread of the story. They think Hollywood actress decides to play Inventor. How cute, how naive, but they're missing the point entirely. Hedy wasn't playing. She'd been preparing for this moment for 7 years. She listened to Helmut Walter explain torpedo guidance systems. She'd heard German engineers discuss radio jamming techniques. She'd absorbed conversations about frequency selection, signal interference, synchronized control systems. She didn't need to learn weapons engineering. She already learned it under the tutelage of the most demanding professors in Europe. What she needed, though, was a collaborator, someone who understood the mechanical implementation, someone who knew how to synchronize multiple systems, someone who'd struggled with the exact same technical challenges she was now facing. Enter George Antheil, the bad boy of music, composer of the notorious Ballet Mécanique, a piece originally scored for 16 synchronized player pianos. Antheil had spent years trying to solve the problem of multiple machines operating in perfect coordination. The meeting happened at Adrian and Janet Gaynor's house in late August 1940. Now, originally, Hedy wanted to discuss her glands, about her breast size. She was quite concerned about that, but once they started talking, the conversation shifted to war. She said that she knew a great deal about munitions, Antheil would later recall, and she was thinking quite seriously of quitting MGM and going to Washington to offer her services to the newly established Inventors Council. Think about this. A girl had spent her time underneath the piano, remember that? She was now prepared to give up her movie career, worth millions in today's dollars, to work on weapon systems. This wasn't a hobby. This was a mission. Act 5, The Inventor. The breakthrough came when Hedy explained her core insight to Antheil. What if a radio transmitter and a receiver could simultaneously hop from frequency to frequency, randomly, in perfect synchronization? A jammer trying to block the signal would have to know which of dozens or hundreds of frequencies to target at any given split second. It would be like trying to jam a phone conversation when the speakers kept switching languages every few words randomly without warning. But they knew what they were talking about, and Antheil immediately saw the solution. From his player piano days, he knew how to create synchronized mechanical systems. They could use perforated paper rolls, like the player piano rolls, to control the frequency hopping. One roll in the transmitter, an identical roll in the receiver, both starting simultaneously when the torpedo was launched. They called it hopping of frequencies. In modern terms, frequency hopping spreads spectrum. You're using it probably right now on your cell phone, whether you know it or not. The foundation technology of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and cellular communications. Working together through the fall and winter of 1940, they developed not just the concept, but the complete mechanical implementation. They solved the synchronization problem. the false signal problem, the coordinating problem. By June 1941, they filed U.S. patent 2,292,387, secret communication system. The U.S. Navy's response? Too bulky? Too bulky. They read player piano in the application. They assumed Hedy and George wanted to install an actual piano inside a torpedo. They never bothered to understand that the player piano mechanism was just one possible conceptual implementation of a much broader concept. As Anthiel later wrote, our fundamental two mechanisms can be made so small that they can fit inside of a dollar-sized watch. The Navy classified the patent and filed it away. Hedy and George's invention would remain secret for the next 4 decades. The long game, Act 6. Here's what I find remarkable about Hedy. She played a 40-year waiting game. After the Navy rejection, she could have given up, returning to acting, forgotten about inventing, but instead she kept working. Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire of Los Angeles, loaned her chemist to develop a cola cube. It flopped, but she learned chemistry. She invented a tissue dispenser, a mechanism for traffic lights, modifications for the Concorde airplane, but she never stopped thinking like an engineer. Meanwhile, her frequency-hopping patent was secretly revolutionizing military communications. Spread spectrum systems, guided missiles, secured battlefield communications, and enabled satellite operations. The technology that the Navy called too bulky became the backbone of modern wireless communications. But Hedy didn't know any of this. Her patent had expired in 1959, 17 years after filing, as patents often do. That reminds me, I've got a patent that's about to come due, and I don't have a plan to renew it because it's probably not going to be as profitable as Hedy's turned out to be. But Hedy, unfortunately, received no royalties, no recognition, no acknowledgement that her idea had changed the world. By 1990, at age 75, she was living modestly in Florida on a Screen Actors Guild pension. I can't understand why nobody has acknowledged this when it's used all over the world, she told Forbes magazine. Never a letter, never a thank you, never any money. Then, in late 1997, something extraordinary happened. A retired Army colonel named Dave Hughes, working on wireless communications for rural schools, discovered Lamarr Anthiel's patent. He realized that this forgotten Hollywood actress had invented the fundamental technology underlying the digital revolution. Hughes nominated her for the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award, and at age 82, Hedy was finally recognized as one of the founding patents of the digital age, alongside names like Vint Cerf and Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the internet. Sadly, she couldn't appear in public to accept the award. Decades of being judged by her appearance had made her fiercely private. But she sent a recording. I hope you feel as good as I feel about it, and it was not done in vain. Thank you. Synthesis. The principles of Hedy Lamarr. So what can we learn from Hedy's extraordinary life? What are the extractable principles that apply beyond her specific circumstances? First, camouflage your capabilities. Hedy understood that being underestimated was an advantage, not a disadvantage. While everyone focused on her gorgeous good looks, she developed her gigantic intelligence in private. People revealed information to her they'd never share with someone they considered a threat, whether technological or militarily. She used surface impressions and superficiality of people to gain access and gain trust. Second principle of Hedy Lamarr. Every constraint contains hidden leverage. Her imprisonment with Mandel, her first husband, became her education in weapons technology. Her rejection by the Navy became a 40-year lesson in persistence and perseverance. Her Hollywood typecasting became a financial independence scheme that funded her real work. So, look for the opportunity hidden inside every limitation. Principle 3. Cross-domain expertise creates breakthroughs, innovations. Hedy's invention succeeded because she combined knowledge from completely different fields, synthesizing them together. Austrian weapons engineering, Hollywood electronics, music synchronization technology. The most powerful innovations happen at the intersection of unrelated domains. Think the computer mouse, think Windows, think the confluence of technology, pioneering spirit, and capital of Silicon Valley. Fourth, reduce ideas to practice systematically. Having a brilliant idea isn't enough. We know that. And Hedy knew frequency hopping would work, but she needed Antheil to help her build the actual mechanism to implement it. Vision without execution is hallucination. Execution without vision is just mere busy work. Genius is vision plus execution. Principle number 5, play longer games than your competition. No one can beat you if you're having fun at what you do. The Navy wanted immediate solutions, but Hedy was solving problems for the next century. While others optimized for quarterly results, she optimized for decades. Patient, capital, intellectual, financial, or creative compounds at rates that will astound you if and only if you put in the work. Sixth, your real work might not be your day job. Hedy made millions as an actress, but she changed the world as an inventor. Don't assume that your profession or your looks defines your limitations, your contributions. Your deepest impact can come from your side hustle, your hobbies, your amateur interests. Principle 7, recognition is a lagging indicator. Her frequency hopping patent was ignored for 40 years, then became fundamental to our digital economy. The most important work often appears worthless until it becomes indispensable. Play for long-term value, not short-term validation. So, to summarize Hedy's remarkable life and contributions on the scientist, the ultimate frequency that she brought to life is that every time you use Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth, or cell data, you're using Hedy Lamarr's invention. The woman that Hollywood called the most beautiful in the world built the invisible and beautiful infrastructure of the connected planet. But here's what I find most fascinating about her story. She never stopped being curious. At age 85, she was still inventing. She had developed a fluorescent dog collar, designing bath aids for disabled people, working on facial exercise techniques right up until her death in January 2000. She was taking things apart to understand how they work. That curiosity, that refusal to accept the world as it is given, that compulsion to improve everything she encountered, that's the real lesson I take from Hedy Lamarr's remarkable life. She proved that genius isn't about credentials or recognition or even understanding. Genius is about seeing problems everywhere and refusing that they can't be solved, pushing through the boundaries of your religion, of your race, of your continent that you're on, and even the profession that you're so good at, to push beyond that limitation, to go beyond the limits, as this podcast, at least the Into the Impossible podcast, brands itself. It's about never stopping to learn, see how things work, and being curious. And playing games so long that other people forget you're playing and have long since grown up and moved on. The frequency that mattered most wasn't the radio frequencies that Hedy learned to hop. It was the frequency of curiosity, the relentless daily practice of asking, how does this work? How could it work better? That frequency is available to anyone. The question is, are you tuned in? This is Brian Keating, and this has been an episode of the Scientist podcast on the Into the Impossible Network. Stay tuned next week for another fascinating journey and glimpse into a scientist's life and book. And today's episode has been based on the wonderful book, Hedy's Folly, The Life and Breakthrough Inventions of Hedy Lamarr, the Most Beautiful Woman in the World, by Richard Rhodes. Richard Rhodes is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, best known for his Making of the Atomic Bomb. And Hedy's Folly, which was published in 2011, is considered the definitive biography of Hedy Lamarr, particularly focusing on scientific contributions and inventions rather than just her Hollywood career. The book is very valuable to me in this episode because Rhodes had access to previously unavailable documents and Patents by Hedy interviewed her children and associates, conducted extensive research into the technical aspects of her inventions, places her work in proper historical and scientific context, and most importantly, for me at least, he does not fall victim to the mere mythology of Hollywood and putting her merely on that pedestal. And I think that he's remarkable in that he put the same rigor and technical chops that he did into his book on the atomic bomb's history into this remarkable woman's life. And I hope you'll pick up a copy. We'll put some information about it in the show notes. Till next time, never stop wondering and always be curious.